Good morning, dear students. Today is British history lesson. So, for this whole year, you have been studying about Renaissance, which means rebirth. Till now, we have studied the effect of Renaissance in the field of art, architecture, etc. Now we will learn the effect of Renaissance in the lives of people. Here we'll be focusing more on the lives of women. So, the name of the lesson is What was the role of women during the Renaissance? What was the role of women during the Renaissance? Please take page number 36. So we'll be covering from 36 to 39. So please take page number 36. So in British history, it is very important to read the whole lesson. So there are several sources which you can read by yourself, and I'll be discussing the main contents of the lesson. And I'll give you a worksheet, so you have to complete it and submit it within the prescribed date. So, what was the role of women during the Renaissance? So, learning objective. State the different lives women had in Italy during the Renaissance period. So, here we will learn the different lives of women. Women as slaves, women as patrons, women as artists, etc. So, this happened in Italy. So, the first topic. Women as slaves. So you all know who are slaves, right? So slavery was a very common thing in the earlier days. Nowadays it is very less seen, but even now the name may be different. It may be happening all over the world. But anyway, slavery was a very common thing in those days. There were several slaves in Italy, both men and women. So taking into consideration both men and women, there were several slaves in Italy. Slaves could be bought cheaply in the market. See, they can be bought. They use the term bought. That means they were not considered as human beings. They were something like some objects or items which we buy from the market. So slaves could be bought cheaply in the market. Girls and young women were much in demand in markets of Venice and Genoa. So in the markets of Venice and Genoa, so much demand was for girls and young women. So these old women were not having much demand. Slaves were bought from Greece, Turkey, Russia, Central Asia, etc. So from Greece, Turkey, Russia and Central Asia, slaves were brought and they were sold in the markets of Venice and Genoa, and girls and young women were having much demand. Slaves were put in same category as domestic animals. See how cruel it is? The human beings who are just like us were simply considered as domestic animals. They were put in the category of domestic animals and they were bought openly in the market without any hesitation by people, by rich people. Slave owners could do whatever they wished on their slaves. No one questioned them. So it was happening in those days. Slave owners will buy their slaves and they will do whatever they want on them. They can make them cry, make them laugh, make them do all their works, even if it is good or bad, whatever. So they were treated so cruelly mostly. But a slave girl living with a rich family often lived better compared to a girl who was not a slave but born in a poor family. See the irony? A slave girl who was living with a rich family was living better than a poor girl, because those days the poor girls suffered a lot. So next. So the next topic is Renaissance marriage. So we discussed how women were treated as slaves. Now Renaissance marriage which took place during the period of Renaissance. In rich families, a daughter's marriage was arranged for her by her parents. Girl's opinion was not considered much. See, this is the case of rich family. Even in rich family, daughter's marriage, that means the daughter was not given any choice to choose her husband. The family would choose a man for her and she would get married to him. Some families use their daughter's marriage to strengthen their political alliance and trading links. So, children understand, the condition of women was so worse because even in rich families this was happening. The daughters were considered as for strengthening political alliance and trading links. So they were not treated as their own thing. They were treated something they were married for some particular purposes. Dowries were given during marriages. I hope you all know what is dowry. Dowry is the amount of money or gold or something expensive given to the husband or his family during the marriage. So the girl's parents give dowries to the husband's family or husband. Poor families found it difficult to get their daughters married. So even now, this condition is prevailing all over the world. So poor families always find it difficult to get their daughters married. Mostly, the youngest daughter became nun. So nun means in Christians. So we are talking about Italy. More Christians are there. So becoming a nun means she will never get married. So that was the reason why most of the youngest daughters would become a nun, so that they don't want to make her marry and they don't want to spend much money for her. So because this getting married a daughter was a really expensive thing because of this dowry especially. Taking into consideration their education, most girls were not provided education. See, we are talking about girls only. So in the case of boys, they were provided education. They were found as an asset, but girls were not found like that. They were something always expensive because money has to be spent for her because of this dowry and all. That is why parents are not using their money for her education. Women of rich families were not seen in public. If they did, they used to cover their faces. So even if they went out, at least for going to the church or something like that, very for urgent purposes, they used to cover their faces. They were not having much freedom. Girls were considered ready for marriage at the age of 12. Usually they were married at the age of 15 or 16. Can you imagine? You people may be at the age of 15 or 16. Can you imagine a girl of your age was getting married? Or at age 12 means she is very, very young. But still, they considered her age as she was ready for a marriage. That was a condition prevailing in Italy during this period. So now we will discuss something good. That means women as patrons and artists. Women as patrons and artists. There were many women who were patrons. See, so that was a period when most of the women were always inside the home. They were not allowed to go outside the home. So at that period, due to this renaissance, due to this rebirth of ideas, at least some women were ready to show their own abilities and their energy, and they were coming to the public. Isabella d'Este was a famous patron. So Isabella d'Este was a famous patron. She received a broad education. So you can always understand that education is a very strong weapon for everyone, for both men and women. It's always a weapon, and it gives us self-respect. She was interested in the ideas of Renaissance. Because of this education only, she got interested in the ideas of Renaissance. That is why she became a famous patron. She was married to Duke of Mantua. She was a patron who was paid for work by even Leonardo da Vinci, the famous artist. Okay. During the Renaissance, a large number of women became successful artists. So they were using their own creativity. Lavinia Fontana was an official painter to Pope. So Pope, you all know, is very important for Christians. He is such a higher authority. So a woman women also reached such high position during that period because of getting education, and they were ready to show their own creativity. Vasari's Lives of Artists included a number of women artists. So Vasari wrote a book, Lives of Artists. It included biographies of all those whom he considered to be important figures of Renaissance art. It included a number of female artists, women artists. One of them was Sophonisba Anguissola. So Sophonisba Anguissola was one very famous artist who was described in Vasari's Lives of Artists. So a little history of her is given in the textbook. You can read it by yourself. So children, study well and complete the worksheet. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Bye. Thank you.